All right, so it's just right after 6:30, so we will kick things off. I would like to introduce Christine Grant to welcome all of our guests and introduce tonight's event.
Lecture series, panel discussion titled Policing Campuses and Communities of Color. Historically, the relationship between people of color and law enforcement officers has long been a topic of concern and controversy. Tonight's panel discussion is the fourth of the 2021 DEI lecture series here at University of Hartford. This year, the planning committee chose to focus the series around the topic of race. We want to thank the university's Rogow Distinguished Visiting Lecturer Program for their support of the DEI lectures, and we continue to look forward to their partnership with us for the coming year. Thank you again for being a great partner. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for tonight's discussion, Dr. Bilal Sekou, Associate Professor of Political Science in the University of Hartford's Hilliard College and a great member of the DEI Lecture Series Planning Committee, along with some other great faculty members and staff across our campus. Professor Sekou, it's all yours.
Thanks a lot, Christine. First of all, thank you for your leadership in helping to pull together these very fine lectures this semester and last semester. So again, thanks for your leadership on that. Gives me pleasure to introduce this panel of very distinguished people, and I'm really excited and looking forward to hearing what they have to say tonight about this very important topic. So we can get the next slide. So first of all, it gives me a pleasure to introduce Dartray Belk, a former student of mine here at the University of Hartford. Detective Belk is an officer with the New York City Police Department, serving as the African American liaison to the Police Commissioners Unit. He is a 12-year veteran with the New York Police Department, and it is a great pleasure to have him be a part of this panel. Next, we have Dr. Albert DiChiara, who is the Department Chair of Sociology and Criminal Justice here at the University of Hartford. Dr. DiChiara earned his PhD in sociology from the University of Missouri and has served on the faculty of the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice since 1990. And it's a pleasure, and thank you so much for being here. And finally, we have Steven Healy. He is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Margolis Healy. Steve Healy is a nationally recognized expert on campus safety, the Clery Act, and Title IX. From an academic and research perspective, Steven is keenly interested in how schools and colleges resource and support safety and security initiatives, and how campus safety agencies engage with members of their campus community. So once again, thank you to all three of our panelists. And so, what I'd like to do now is to really dive into this conversation with our panelists. And I'd like to frame it this way. Majorities of both Black and white Americans say that Blacks are treated less fairly than whites in dealing with the police and by the criminal justice system as a whole. Black adults are about 5 times as likely as whites to say they've been unfairly stopped by police because of their race or ethnicity. An overwhelming majority of police officers say that high-profile fatal encounters between Black people and police officers has made their job harder. So this is the context in which this conversation tonight starts in. And what I'd like to do is to really open up with the only police officer on the panel, Detective Belk. And so, Detective Belk, let me start off by asking you, I think, a fairly straightforward question. What are police for?
Good evening, everyone. And first and foremost, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Bilal Sekou, Professor DiChiara, Mr. Healy, and Christine Grant for giving me an opportunity to speak, and also representing the University of Hartford as an alum of class of 2007. For your question, what are the police for? The police are public servants for the community. We serve the community. We are people who we engage the community and we work on having proper resources for the community. I know we're dealing with something major situation with hard tensions between the police community, but as a police officer and me being a police officer for 13 years, it's never an easy day for me. But I make sure that every day I take my time to make sure I know the community, make sure I'm here for the community, and make sure that they can trust in me on every situation I encounter. So hopefully that answers your question.
Bilal, if you don't mind me jumping in for a second, I kind of go back to my early days as a police officer, and I remember someone describing to me that to that very question, what are the police for? And I remember my supervisor telling me that something's happening that shouldn't be happening, and somebody better do something about it quick. And so I think what has happened is police have become the first and last resort for every issue that folks are dealing with. And I think what we are realizing as we look much more deeply at the role of police in society is that the police aren't the right resource for every single situation. And so when you start to talk about defunding the police and kind of understanding and unpacking that notion of defunding the police, what does that really mean? I think for the most part, it means making sure that we are redistributing resources to the appropriate first responder. And what we talk to hundreds and hundreds of students, faculty, and staff on campuses every day. And what they're telling us is that the police aren't the first resource for every single issue. The matter then becomes, how do you invest in those appropriate resources? And how do you triage situations when someone calls in and says, X is happening, I need someone. So who is that someone? And have we appropriately resourced that other resource? And have we oriented them to what they have to do? And this is especially important when you're talking about situations that involve someone who is potentially dealing with a mental health crisis.
Can't hear.
Well, in this country. Were you able to hear that question?
No, we didn't hear what you just said. We just unmuted you.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm sorry, Dr. DiChiara, as someone who teaches about policing, how would you speak about that question of what the police are for, but also frame it in the context of policing here in the United States and the role that the police have played?
Sure. There's the what the police are for response in theory, and then there's the what are the police for response in practice. And so if we look at the theories of policing, there's a mythology that the cops are representatives of the working class, the middle class, who will walk the streets and show everyone what a proper human being is in a civil society, and that they are crime fighters and that they are protectors of everyone, and that is a lot of people believe that, and that's true to a certain extent. But in practice, the police force has always been a repressive institution in society. And we now know through a lot of good historical research that the first police forces were slave police forces, that the police were used to control labor unions in the working class, and that it became, in some places, an internal army when we began to militarize the police. So we can't apply the theory of the police to the contemporary situation, because those police are long gone.
Thanks a lot, for that answer. And I think that's important context in terms of understanding the history of policing, but also understanding the way in which people see policing today. And I think just very good answers in that particular sense. Steve, I want to start with you with this question. because you, I think, pointed us in this direction. What do you think is different about the moment of time that we're in where giant numbers of Americans are now mobilizing around this issue of policing and communities of color? And that's from the 5,000 feet sort of look at what's going on. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think we're at a tipping point, right? Folks, and not just Black folks or people of color, people are tired. People are tired of seeing what they see on television. They're tired of what they're experiencing when they're dealing with police in some situations. So I think that what we saw with Mr. Floyd was kind of okay, this is it. We got to do something different, right? What's the old saying? If you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got. I think the public is very loud and clear that we need to fundamentally shift, that we need to transform. I would also say that from a law enforcement perspective or from a police executive perspective, folks are tired of, okay, we got to change again. I've talked to a lot of my colleagues around the country, and they're retiring because they're like, hey, look, I'm going to sit this one out. I've done enough change. We had community policing, and we had problem solving, and it's just kind of the sense of ongoing kind of transformation. What I've asked folks to do is to kind of lean into this moment and really appreciate the fact that we are at a time where the community is telling us that we want something different. So how do we become what the community wants us to be? And I think that is something that we've really lost sight of. Everyone likes to talk about Sir Robert Peel and the origins of policing, and the policing of the people, the police of the people, the people of the police, right? The bottom line is that if we are in fact servants, which we are, then we have to listen. And I think that's a piece of this whole equation that has been left out for a very long time. We haven't listened, right? We haven't listened to our communities, and instead applied, in some cases, over policing, in some cases, over surveillance, and at the end of the day, underserving, especially those populations in those communities that need the right police. I remember having a conversation with a colleague when I was at Princeton, Eddie Glaude, who told me, when I used to call you guys, I had no problem calling you guys because I knew who you were. Like, if I needed you for something, I knew who you were. I had a relationship. I had trust with you. And another colleague of mine recently said, I figured the exact saying, relationships are built at the speed of trust. And if you don't trust, then you can't have a relationship. And so I think this is a moment where we need to step back. We need to listen, and we need to change. We need to transform and become what the community expects us to become.
Right. Trey, you're someone who sees this issue from the inside as being a police officer, and I'm sure you saw the protests, the demonstrations. I mean, how would you answer that question about what has been going on, within the community and how it's affected you in the work that you do?
I mean, from a police standpoint, seeing it from what the community standpoint is, there's a lot of community unrest, and we truly understand that. The incident was very tough, and it was really tough for myself, being an African American and also an African American police officer. So it's now we got to think how we can be able to engage our community. How can we be able to sit them down and have this conversation on how we can be better and how can we be able to make a change? We bring people. Where did I learn how to bring people to the table is when Professor DiChiara brought me to the table with the Weed and Seed Initiative, almost equivalent. We bring them people to the table and we can see how we can bring proper resources to our communities so a tragedy like this won't happen. And make sure there's no major unrest and make sure that everybody can be able to live free, protected, and have trust in the police department with the communities.
Right. Professor DiChiara, I know you can answer that question, but it's actually a slightly different one I'd like to start you off with, but you feel free to answer that one as well. Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, Eric Garner, Sandra Bland, Pamela Turner, Yvette Smith, Ayanna Stanley Jones, Freddie Gray. The list goes on and on. Some say that the police killing of unarmed African American men and women are isolated incidents given traction by the media. When you look at these cases, are they more the result of how policing works in America, or does it have more to do with our ongoing struggles around race in this country?
Oh boy, an easy one. First off, and I think I can go into what you asked. When we talk about responding to the community, we have to understand that there are many communities, and that so that the folks in the west end of Hartford have demands on the police that are quite different than the folks in the north end, and so it's the type of community we're dealing with. So I want to say that all those cases have to be looked at as unique cases. We can't lump them all together. And there are millions and millions of citizen police interactions every day that are just perfectly fine, and everyone leaves them happy. Okay, so this is not a usual situation of violence and whatnot. But police, they develop an attitude about at work that keeps them safe, and it includes authoritarianism and cynicism and suspicion, and we grow up with an idea of the usual suspects. We have an image of what people who cause problems look like, and how they talk, and where they go, and how they dress. So this happens, and as we have become a different society, the police have to change because society changes, everything changes, and we're a different society now. And one of the things that people have now is a heightened sense of their rights and their specialness and their integrity, and that's taken from them in a lot of ways in these very, very wide-ranging exclusionary processes and in situations we create. Gated communities, surveillance cameras everywhere, dress codes, zero tolerance on any kind of untoward or boisterous behaviors. And so with these typifications are there, and the police are dealing initially with taken for granted assumptions about what the situation is going to be like. And anything that interrupts that interaction is going to be a problem. So if the cop says, do this, and the guy says, no, I won't, well, now it's going to escalate, okay? It's going to go up. It's going to change. And our society is very edgy now. Change is very fast. It's very frightening. The old industrial order is gone. There's a new digital order that vast numbers of Americans can never participate in now, given their levels of education. And it's going to be a problem for the police. The idea of defunding the police, the bad term, reallocating police resources back toward the social safety net that's been destroyed since the 1980s, and maybe rebuilding that would take a big burden off the police, and would provide better services to citizens who need those kinds of services. And that would be a step in the right direction, but I think it's going to be tough for a long time to come.
Let me ask Steve, how would you reply to that question I threw out there?
I think that the professor has the point. I think the point that I got from his comment is around this social safety net. Right. And so, if you think about the 80s and the 90s, Clinton administration pouring millions and millions and millions of dollars in policing because people said, there's too much crime. We need to do something about crime. Right. So you pour all this money toward the police when that money really should have been directed and invested in other systems and other structures to help the folks who are most impacted, those people who are in disenfranchised neighborhoods. I'm from Baltimore. And so, understanding the uprisings following Freddie Gray's death, and understanding that this is a culmination of fear and tension and just kind of just the boiling out of kind of all of this that we've been dealing with. You keep giving us more police, but you're not giving us better education, or you're not giving us better health services, or I live in a food desert, right? I mean, it's all of these other things when we bought into this idea that the police can be everything to everybody. And that's not what it was framed. Well, Sean King would say the system actually works the way it was designed to work. But as the professor mentioned, it's time for us to shift that thinking and really invest in those resources that are really going to address the issue. And you just think about houselessness or homelessness, and how we've criminalized being homeless, right? And so if I live in a neighborhood and I see someone I think is homeless and they're hanging out on the corner, what do? I call the police. I don't call someone that's going to help them in terms of providing them social service options. I call someone who is going to criminalize the behavior, and now this person is a part of the system. And unfortunately, we know that oftentimes when people get in the system, they never come out of the system. So we need to change, we need to shift that thinking away from making everything a police problem. Yeah, do we need police? Yes. Is policing complicated? It's highly complex, especially if you're working in a place where trade works. Highly complex. But everything is not a police problem, and we need to invest in the resources to address those other issues.
People, we have a Q&A and chat room, so if you have questions you'd like us to ask the panelists to definitely put those in the Q&A or in the chat room, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we possibly can. Trey, this raises an interesting question, because obviously during the protests during the summer, the issue of defund the police was something that was talked about quite a bit. And I think, as explained, this call at its core is to divest resources, when you really think about, from police budgets, but invest them in meaningful public safety and well-being programs like housing, healthcare, job growth, and education. But the critics claim that this will decrease safety and lead to lawlessness. I mean, do you have a sense, and I know this may be a difficult question for you to answer because you're right there on the front lines, but do you have a sense that that would be the case if that were to occur as a police officer in the New York Police Department?
I believe that if you take the money that is allocated to us and pump it into your communities, it should be pumped into the correct things that the community may need. One of them should be, they should have like a cure violence group who can be able to ease tensions before it gets to the police department, or they have to get anything that's police involved. When it comes down to mental health, they should have a social worker on site to be able to assist before we're needed. Those are things that should be pumped into our communities. It also helps people get jobs. It also helps people be educated, and also it's a helping ease when a heavy situation that does happen. We can be able to rely on this person we can be able to call them and state that, listen, we got a situation that's going on your block. Is it okay if you can assist us in this? And those are things that we should be using. So basically, we should use the community help with helping us in the police department.
Actually, Trey, I want to come back to you with a sort of a follow-up question, because I think this is already, I think Steve has alluded to this on several occasions. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about this. Do we ask too much of the police? Do we throw them into situations they're not trained to handle, perhaps not even equipped to handle?
I feel that every day is a different situation. So we're equipped to learn whatever our situation is. And then if it's a new situation, we'll come back and learn it again. The beauty about the police department, there are so many different units that can help a person that's a police officer that's in the streets with different tactics and different ways to handle situations. Also, I'm big on understanding your community, knowing your community. It makes a huge difference, especially for myself with 13 years as a New York City police officer, now a detective. And When I got to know my community, I got to know the mother, the father, the grandmother, the grandfather, the foster parents of the child. I got to know everybody. You know why I know everybody? Because we did the icebreaker. I said hello. And once you say hello to a person, they're already scared of you being in uniform. So when you approach them, you're approaching them correct. Listen, hi, how are you doing? All is well, just in the area, nothing. We're not even going back and forth, just checking the area. That's all we're doing. You know, once you have that dialogue and it's a constant dialogue, this does change a lot of ways. And I feel that once we constantly have the dialogue and the engagement process, there's a lot of change.
Al, what are your thoughts about this question about do we ask the police to perhaps do too much in that sense? You're mute.
It's a very complicated response I'm going to make here. First, we do ask them to do too much, but the trajectory of the police since the 1970s or 80s has been toward more militarization. And I'm not going to go on a rant on that, but I want to say this: that I worked in Hartford for 8 years in the Weed and Seed program. Trey was with me for some of that, and the police used most of the money they got from that program for equipment and for overtime. So they needed that money to meet needs they were not meeting. Okay, they needed that money, and that money could have been spent to hire specialists for all kinds of things. They left that to the NGOs and the nonprofits to use their part of the weed and seed money to address that. And there's a whole story to be told on how that money is used. So because the police took that turn right in the late 60s and 70s, and it wasn't until Barack Obama ended the program in his administration, the 1033 program, that we've seen less militarization and a rethinking at the same time, given the protests. So yes, we do, but the reason why we're asking the cops to do too much is because we made some bad decisions way back in terms of how we were going to adapt to a new society. So, we had the 70s, we had a lot of minority hiring, a lot of female hiring, and that worked. Community policing was a very strong component until it was ended. It's now something quite similar, but with a different name. It's the Promise Zone, or they have other names with promise in them. We have one in the North End. And I've soured on community policing to a large extent because it's a one-way street. The community is asked to partner with the police, but the police are not partnering with the community in meaningful ways. So there are communities where there are gray markets where people work to survive, and the community, the white community, the growth machine that runs the community might find that kind of gray market bothersome. And so the community doesn't get what they need, which is a new way to survive, but they do get to call the cops on their kids and their friends.
Steve, I want to come to you on this issue, and I think Al has raised. One of the things that stunned me when Ferguson happened was just how militarized the police were in Ferguson, and this sort of movement for Black Lives, that has sort of grown out of like Ferguson and also the murder of Trayvon Martin, and this idea, that Black Lives Matter in many ways drew attention to racial discrimination and racial violence in society. And in many ways, BLM is about recognizability, right? A public insistence on that Black people exist and that Black lives really do matter as much as any other racial group. But as you know, a lot of people argue that the police are under attack by BLM, right? And they argue that Black Lives Matter is anti-police. I mean, what are your thoughts about, this militarization and this response that I think BLM is to that, and also this perception, though, that somehow this is anti-Black, anti-police, excuse me.
So that's a very complicated question, obviously, Bilal. Thank you very much for that question. So how do I answer that? So I don't think that fundamentally Black Lives Matter is anti-police. I think that Black Lives Matter is anti-racism. And in so much as we assimilate policies and practices that disenfranchise a whole group of people, then it's the system that's under attack. The system has to change. And so I don't see, obviously there are fringes on all ends, right? There are some in the movement for defunding police to say, no, we should be abolishing the police altogether, right? Maybe that's a very utopian goal that we'll get to one day. Be nice to not need police in our lives every single day. And this is coming from a person who's been a career cop. But I don't see Black Lives Matter as anti-police. I see it anti-racism. And when you listen to people and you hear them express their lived experiences of interacting with police, you understand why the over militarization or the trending toward militarization it offends so many people, right? People don't want to be policed, right? They want to be part of again, this safety, what the professor said earlier, this safety net, right? So I think that we have to listen to folks. We have to find out what people want us to do in order to restore our legitimacy. But you also have to remember, when we see these things, these images over and over and over again, people automatically assume that because that cop in Minneapolis did it, then the cop in my community could do it, right? Or the cop in Baltimore and Ferguson. And you see over and over and over again, Louisville, you see over and over again that this is what people are exposed to, and they come to think that this is what the entire community of policing is about, and that's not what it's about. Now, are there systemic issues that we have to address? Absolutely, we have to address that. We're duty bound. We have a moral obligation to address those issues where we are treating one group of people fundamentally differently than we treat the majority.
Now, Trey, you're right there in the middle of this. You, I'm sure, saw and maybe were at some of these BLM protests that took place in New York over the summer. What's your response to this issue, this movement, this question that people are raising about policing that Black Lives Matter folks are bringing to the forefront?
A lot of people want change, and we're voicing our ways of how we want to change, and it's great to protest. Never will stop another person not to protest and express their First Amendment on whatever they would like to express. Biggest thing is just that I'm always big on working with the community, and that's what the main thing is. But it doesn't just lead to me working with the community; it's leading to our elected officials and help making decisions and proper decisions on bridging our gaps. They're the policymakers. They're the ones who can pass laws and pass bills to make sure we protect everybody. Me being a guy who lives in the city still, and I'm always going to be affected no matter what. But we got to worry about the future of the people as well, and we always got to make sure we all work as one, and that's just unifying.
Al, what's your thoughts on that question around Black Lives Matter, this movement, what it in relation to these questions about being anti-police? What are your thoughts? You're muted, still on mute.
There are probably some who are anti-police. I think it's correct to say it's anti-racism. I think these names are selected in the heat of the moment, so to speak, and maybe other expressions could be used more effectively. But I think that one of the problems is that the country doesn't have a kind of a common core culture any longer. And so we can't rely on, old ways of thinking and saying, everyone should do it this way. We've always done it this way. This is the common culture, but it's not. Too many people are in too many situations where their lives are too complicated for that. And I think it was stated somewhere that people don't like to be policed, and that's it. But the policing is centered on certain kinds of people, certain neighborhoods, certain, groups. The stop and frisk issue in New York City, for example, huge numbers of minorities stopped, very few found to be in violation of the law. A lot of pressure on the police to do these as part of their jobs. And the police officer on the beat, he answers to his superiors, who answers to the commissioner, who answers to the mayor, who answers to the citizens or whoever he gets his marching orders from. So the cop on the street is just as much burdened by this as anyone else. Like I said, I worked on 8 years with the Hartford Police on weed and seed. I know a lot of police officers. I never met one that didn't think he was doing a good job and trying his best. It's a two-way street, and there's a lot of anger there, and it's easy to lash out at those people whose job it is to keep the streets clean, so to speak. It's easy to get very angry when people challenge you in your authority, and you have pressure on you to do your job and to fulfill your quotas, whatever they might be, or to live up to expectations. So I think to call it racist is not as it's more than that. It's more than race. It's about a lot of things that are happening in a changing America.
Steve, you mentioned earlier that there were some systemic problems here. I mean, what are those systemic problems with policing you think that go on in our society?
Well, I think for one, and a lot of folks have written and talked about this, the sense of the mindset that you bring to the job. Are you bringing a guardian mindset, or are you bringing a warrior mindset? And I think that there's a lot written in the 21st century final report, task force report around this transformation to a guardian mindset. So we want people who can kick indoors, but we don't want people who want to kick indoors. And so I think it starts with selecting the right people. And it's also a matter of inculcating them into how we do business. Are we a values-based organization? What is the culture of the organization? You know that we always say this, culture trumps policy every single day. So what is the culture? That comes from the leadership. What is the culture that we're establishing, and are we holding people accountable to the values that we not only espouse or put on our cars, but do we actually live those values in every single interaction that we have with members of the public? And so this notion of accountability, notion of hiring the right people, that's complicated, hiring the right people. And people don't, many of us recognize how complicated that is, but we need to adapt to some of the additional tools that we have to make sure that we are hiring the people who want to serve as a guardian and not as a warrior.
Trey, and sort of thinking about that role that police play in the community, and I know I'm going to love to see you and Al sort of battle on this issue of community policing, given the fact that you have been so involved in community policing. What are the goals from your perspective of community policing? And, what are some of the barriers you think to good police-community relations?
I know me and Professor DiChiara is about to go in on this one. So the biggest thing is to know your community. I stressly talked about it earlier in regards to knowing who's who in your community. And also working on bringing resources to your community. Like, there can be a block that is being problematic. We have one person that we can be able to be our liaison to that community, and we can be able to work on something for future incidences that do happen. So a lot of communities, a lot of blocks in our communities, especially in New York, have block associations. So I always encourage them, listen, start your own block association so you can be able to make sure that things are going correctly in your community. Also, get yourself involved in the community councils. You have a community council that's in your precinct. also known as like the 73rd, 75th. All precincts have community councils. Get on board, join it, go to the meetings, express your comments, concerns, and get to know your commanding officer. Get to know your neighborhood coordination officers, as are known as NCOs in the NYPD. Also get to know your community affairs, because they're going to be the front runners to yours helping your situation on whatever you have. Also, another thing is you have to, you know, I talk about this because it has happened, and your commanding officers in your precinct has basically more than likely has an open door policy. And the biggest thing is they want to know who's in that community and how can we be able to make stuff work. You have clergies, you have other non-for-profit organizations that come in and give them a chance to speak to the roll calls for the day at nighttime, during the 4-bys, during the midnights, to let them know who's who. Because when you're out in the streets and y'all have the interaction, and there could be somebody that's a person in need, a person has mental disorder and he needs assistance. Usually when a person's wearing a uniform, it goes up to like level 10, you know? And then you see somebody that they know we can stop them, and it has happened. I've sit there and I've had to deal with a situation, and I see somebody that's in the community. I'm like, yo, do you know this person? Yeah, what's his name? His name is Eric. Okay, let me try to get dialogue. Eric, how you doing? Listen, let's talk. Let's try to figure this out. How can I help you? You know, once you get a name, you try to get a location, even try to get his mother's information on who they live with. It makes your job easier for the day. So that's why I strongly encourage that we bridge the gap into the communities and get to know your community that you're serving.
All right. Al, what are you sort of expressed some reservations about the effectiveness of community policing. What are those reservations?
I think it's oversold as community policing. What it is residents partnering with the police to help the police do the job they've always done, and not much has changed. I did this this survey a long time ago, and I asked about attitudes toward the police, and I found that the residents didn't like the police, but they loved their community service officer. So the guy who was there talking to him every day was getting the job done for him. They liked that person, you know. The people making the rules, the people driving by in cars with white shirts on, no offense to Andre, were the problem. So there has to be a connection, a more meaningful connection, like the day-to-day connection between the CSO, the community service officer, and a resident. Residents are all kinds of residents. There's some that are crabby, and there's some that are really, really kind of focused and businesslike. And the police have to deal with all those types, and they all have legitimate demands at times. One of the biggest problems that happened in Hartford, I think, was in the 1950s. They stopped the walking beat, and they put their police officers in cars, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it happened at a time of a large influx of Puerto Rican migrants. And the conflicts in the South End in particular were really significant, and the police weren't there to have that personal relationship, and it took a long time to solve those problems. So community policing can work if there is more community and less policing, and that also is about building informal social controls. You know, like having the grandma looking out the window and knows the kids' parents and is going to tell them that they're cursing out there. You know. And building some economic development.
You know, Steve.
Can I chime in if that's all right?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, no problem. So, Professor, you are absolutely right. The biggest thing in a police department or police officers that's in the front line is that we should know our community, strictly should know our community. And bringing other resources in to that community will help a lot of things prosper in that community. You know, one biggest thing in the African-American community, and Professor Bilal, you could agree with me on this one, is that the African-Americans believe in religion. So wouldn't you want somebody that's religious to be in the front to help assist us with easing the tension in our communities? You know, that's why they have clergy councils. That's why they have like something called the God Squad that's in Brooklyn. They come out to these events and they put themselves in the front line to say, listen, well, listen, police officers are not that bad. How can we be able to help this tension, ease this tension? And they do listen to their parishioner. They do listen to their bishop. They do listen to their pastor. And that's how we can be able to, service our community. So that's just true.
Right.
We just need proper resources in there.
Right. I know we have a couple of questions that I see in the Q&A, but I want to ask a really quick question to Steve because of his expertise, because we're talking about community. And of course, the University of Hartford, like many other campuses across the nation, 68% of the nation's 7,000 plus institutions actually sit in urban areas, right? And what can urban campus police departments do to provide better safety services to students and faculty and staff? And what are your sort of thoughts on that issue?
That's a great question. And as other folks have mentioned, we have had this trending toward more militarization. I think in campus policing, we have also been trending toward more of a militaristic. We've campus police, we've always fought to be seen and viewed as equal to our municipal counterparts. And now I think we're starting to move in a different direction. It's like, oh no, that's them, we're different, right? We have some organic, natural systems that make us more accountable, that make campus police more accountable to the campus communities. However, as I mentioned, we have been trending toward more of a police or law enforcement perspective and approach to our work. I think we have to kind of rethink. We need to back up a little bit, be more intentional about what is our mission. And our mission, we don't determine what our mission is. The community decides what our mission is. So again, I know I keep saying it, we have to listen. We have to listen. We have to really engage in constructive dialogue with the campus community. When we talk with campus members all over the country, what they tell us is that they want transparency. They want to know, how you hire these officers? How do you train these officers? What are your policies? If I have a complaint, how do I file a complaint? I need to know all of those things. So campus members tell us they want institutions to be more transparent about policies and practices. Once you're transparent, you build trust. And when you build trust, then that restores the relationship. And I believe that the more we can do to be purposeful around how we engage with the campus community, I think that campus police are in a very unique position to change the narrative around what the police are. And I think that we need to be more intentional around seizing that opportunity to shift the narrative so that folks know, no, actually, I've had experiences with police where they actually were there for my safety. They understood what my safety. And as you said, or someone said earlier, communities are different, right? Everyone experiences safety differently. And so the only way that you can find out what the community wants is to ask and then to react. But you have to be transparent and you have to be accountable to the community.
Right. Al, you're sort of leaning in like you want to weigh in on that question, but I do have a question for you. But do you have something you wanted to say about that?
I wanted to say something about knowing your community. Some years ago, Hartford Police decided to do an anti-truancy campaign, and they were rounding up kids who are not in school and putting them in the backseat of cars and driving them to school. And the parents rebelled against this. They said, "Why is my kid being driven all around town? So people can see him in a police car." The parents didn't want that, and by not addressing the community in that way, they missed that chance to get that program working a little bit better. It didn't work so well. Now the question you have is what?
So so this is a question we have in the Q&A. Someone asks, and I think you mentioned this earlier. They asked, can diversity in hiring change the situation? Or is the brothers in blue mindset, fraternity mindset, too strong? So I guess, to what extent can diversity sort of change this, perhaps?
Well, police officers, the word fraternity is using, it's a police union. They're workers, and they bargain collectively to get the best deal they can as workers. And as workers, they're going to stick together. Then there's the informal culture of friendships and having each other's back. And that's very important. We know that there's a lot of cliques in police forces. There's a lot of bad blood in police forces. So finding a group to bond with is important. The police, as they are currently constituted, will always be an external force in the community. Many don't live in the community; they work. They maybe sometimes are a different race or ethnicity from the people they are dealing with. So I think they're going to stick together, and I think I can understand why. I look at when the police do the blue flu, for example, when they stop enforcing the law, as they recently did because of some of the problems they had over the summer. I see this as resistance by workers to control their work environment and to have control over their work situation. So if you frame it as just, boys in blue, you might go in one direction, but if you look at them as workers trying to achieve a safe and productive work experience for themselves, it's something different.
Trey, I want to ask you that same question.
Definitely
and
about to
also
chime
sort
in. I
of,
definitely was coming. I definitely was going.
say it again.
I definitely was going to answer that.
Okay, right. But I also want to add in, someone sort of added on in that in the chat was, how come the community wants diversity, but also we can't get enough people to apply for the job as well, as a part of your answer to that question?
No problem. We have a lot of people, and I deal with it daily. I encourage all minorities to in the New York City Police Department. I encourage them daily. Have they taken on my, challenge? Some has, some haven't. Biggest thing is that, y'all don't want to be a police officer because they see the negative behind it about what the community thinks of them. But I told them, I said, I went 13 years, not a complaint. I've did my job and I did it successfully. It still is doing the great work that I was taught to do, but my training wasn't started in the police department. My training started at the University of Hartford. It started with you and DiChiara giving me an opportunity to make a difference. All I did was walk in your office and say, listen, how can I make a difference? I'm going into the police department and I want to know how I can be able to make a difference. And you guys gave me an opportunity. So now what I'm doing now is paying it forward, giving the young officers that opportunity to be able to make a difference when they're out in the streets, get to know who's who, and also never let them be afraid. There's gonna be challenging moments as a police officer, and it's gonna make you go, what did I sign up for? That's gonna happen, but it's a learning experience, and you'll take that learning experience and you change it your way, understand what's going on as a police officer, and help make a difference to the next police officer. And that's how you'll be able to go in full circle with changing everything in the period, just changing the mind frame of a person that's looking in, if that makes any sense.
Right. And Steve, I want to pull you in on this because there's another question I think that's kind of related to that, but on the other end of this, right? It's about the retraining of veteran officers and holding officers accountable when they violate people's rights. I mean, how critical an issue do you think that is? Is it possible to do where you've got veteran officers who've been around for a while, you know some of these people perhaps, and what's it like trying to retrain these folks and to get them to sort of embrace a different way of approaching the community?
Well, when I think about that I'm going to start with the micro first, kind of thinking about in the campus environment. Sometimes to change people, you have to change people, right? Not everybody is necessarily suited for the role that the evolving role, right? And folks have to kind of step back and ask themselves, do I want to be part of a department that is going to be less focused on crime fighting and more interested and more focused on building relationships, right? There will always be a crime fighting component to policing, obviously, right? But again, it goes back to selecting. How do you find the right folks, and kind of around the diversity issues, and I may have a better answer for this because I don't have the citation in front of me. I've seen research that talks about how diversity in the police department affects use of force and use of force complaints. I think in terms of ethnicity, having it's appropriate to have a department comprised of people that look like the people that you're serving. That is appropriate. I think that the evidence, the research does not say that that necessarily impacts the use of force, police use of force. On the other hand, I have seen research that says that more women in police does in fact have an impact on police use of force. And Professor Al can kind of speak more specifically to that. But again, look, I think we need to become value-driven organizations. What are our values? And our values should be a culmination of what the community expects from us. And again, the only way that you know what the community expects is by listening. We can't sit in a vacuum, develop all these wonderful programs and say, okay, we have a new program. It's called Coffee with a Cop, right? That really, what does that really do, right? The idea behind it is good. It's in the right place. But is that an evidence-based approach to building relationships with community members or campus members in the campus environment?
Right. And we're
sorry,
Dartray.
but that there can be an icebreaker to getting your person in the community. That's why a lot of times when they have a coffee with a cop or they have something that might be temporary, it's just a start off of getting your community. The biggest thing.
No, that's true. No, that's absolutely correct. And I just don't. I just have a visceral reaction when we have a bunch of little singular one-off programs and it's not part of a strategy, right? It has to be part of a strategy, not just you out there having coffee with a cop. The problem is then when you're not there and the next cop comes along, then it's a different setup.
And it's a crawl before you walk kind of thing. I feel that's a start, and then we can graduate to bigger things. It's all about trust. Like I told you, there's something called the Citizens Police Academy that we always mention, and that I always tell people that's a great, I think it's 10 to 12-week program to get to know what the NYPD does, and they also put them through scenarios of what a daily day of what a police does on a daily. So those are gradual steps to get them to have that trust, and we all bridging the gap.
Right. So we're running out of time. So let me and there again there are still questions in the Q&A. I've gotten to most of them, but maybe this is just a quick answer kind of question. And I'll throw this one at you, Al. Do you think that if people really understood what defund the police meant, that if it were explained better, perhaps this is a PR problem. Mm-hmm. Do you think this is something that more people could embrace?
Yeah, I think so. I think that I watch the news like anyone else, and defund the police discussions are usually somewhere toward the end of the news broadcast, just kind of thrown in there. We haven't had a serious national discussion of what the police will be in 21st century America. The 21st century policing document is there. Some great ideas. There's a more holistic idea of what policing is in that document. President Trump, when he was in office, he put his own document out, which is more head banging and things like that. So there's a constituency for both approaches, I think, in this country. So we have to discuss this because these problems will not disappear. They're just going to get different.
Right. Steve, because you've made the argument about, for example, police perhaps not being the right people for certain situations. I mean, think about social workers. They had a question in here, and I think it's an interesting and a good question. You put such a social worker perhaps in a dangerous situation. Is it something that, can they do that job without the police perhaps there? I mean, we talk about, changing the dynamics, but can we really change the dynamics in that way? Would the police need to be there, though, nonetheless?
I think that we have to look at the situations, right? There are lots of models around the country. I always talk about the Cahoots program out in Eugene, Oregon, where they have first responders who are not police officers. They are community-based solution providers. They solve problems, right? So we have evidence that it works. I mean, if you look at Portland, Oregon, and their CIT and advanced CIT, where they have social workers paired up with police officers responding to calls. So we have evidence. In fact, I think New Haven actually has a program similar to that. So we have examples of alternative resources or alternative first responders to certain situations. Again, it's complex, right? And I live out in the Bay Area. San Francisco and Oakland are both taking steps to kind of move to a differential or alternative response model. It's not that easy, right? You have to find the right people that want to do that work as well. But we do have evidence, and the evidence continues to grow and to prove that we don't have to send the police to every situation where someone feels uncomfortable about what someone is doing or how someone is behaving.
Right. So let me close on this question, and I'll let all three of you sort of weigh in on this, right? Given the state of race relations right now in the US and this sort of difficult relationship between police and communities of color, are you optimistic at all about whether things can actually get better? And let me start with Al, then go to Steve, and let Detective Belk be the last one to answer that question.
Yeah, I'll be short. Yes, it's going to get better. The younger generation is mindful of all this, and they're gonna call the shots. It's not going to be people like me. So yes, it is going to get better.
Right. Okay. Steve.
I'm an eternal optimist, and we're working with campus agencies across the country, helping them make that shift. And it's about listening to the young folks. I guess I'm not. So I wake up every day. I feel pretty young, but I think I realize that I'm not that young anymore. But I'm going to pass the reins off to my sons and their sons, and they have a wonderful outlook on what the world can look like, and that's where the change is going to come. So I'm very positive, and we're seeing change. We're seeing it all over the country. We just we're not taking enough time to celebrate the change that we're seeing.
Right. And so the last person to get to speak on this is one of my favorite graduates of the University of Hartford, the detective.
I feel that yes, things will get better. Unification is the main thing. We are taking a strong step into making change, and we see it all around. Just hope that everything stays in a how can I really I think that everything keep rolling in a positive manner to make a difference in this world, because we all have to trust in each other, and if we do not trust in each other, they'll all fail.
Right.
So that we will make a change.
Yeah. Well, thank you to, all of the panel. I mean, this has been a very informative discussion, especially for me, and I imagine also for the people who have been on. I think, we easily could have extended this conversation another hour and really dived even more deeply into a lot of the issues you raised. And so hopefully we'll be able to revisit some of these issues, perhaps in the fall, and invite you guys to come back for part 2, because I just think that there's so much more that needs to be said. So I know there's a slide that should pop up soon from Samantha, so let's wait and see what happens about what's coming up next. All right. Well, and even before I read this slide, I want to, give a shout out to Christine Grant. She has done a really wonderful job of pulling this committee together to make these things happen, providing me with the fire from time to time to get things done and to be a part of this process, to reach out to people. And so once again, thank you so much to Christine. Thank you so much to the committee. Samantha sort of working in the background, doing the magic with all of the stuff with WebEx. And thank you again. We've got another event coming up on April 1st, a town hall event We've got, some great speakers who will talk about vaccine hesitancy. And as we know, this is a serious issue, especially in communities of color, that need to be addressed. And we've got Dr. Edie returning, to us, who was a part of a very excellent program not too long ago. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. And I definitely hope that, folks out there who are watching this conversation will definitely tune in for the next one. And again, once again, thank you to the panelists and thank you to all of the people working the magic behind the scenes.
Thank
Thanks a
you,
lot.
Professor
Thank
Sekou.
you.
Thank you, folks.
All right.